All right. Howdy ho. How's it going? Been pretty good, Em. How about you? Hope yours has been good. Got a good bit of stuff done. That's funny. I don't know if you all knew that there was a live that lasted. I think it was this past Saturday. It was 8 hours and 15 minutes long, or something like that. It was the one where Fiona Ryan came on, and then Quinn came on later. Good evening. How you doing, Nina? Thanks for the support as always. I appreciate you. Yeah, I was just mentioning. I finally uploaded one of my lives to YouTube. I'm just, time wise, but I'm finally doing it. I have to edit out two different parts of it because there was a segment where Fiona Ryan came on, hi Nina, and a segment where Quinn came on from Egypt. So out of the 8 hours and 15 minutes, here you go, Ruby, here. Out of the 8 hours and 15 minutes, there's like an hour. I think Fiona was on from like the 1 hour and 20 minute mark until about 2 hours and 10 minutes. It was about a half an hour she was on. And then I think Quinn was on for like an hour. Well, hello there. Thank you for saying you miss me. I miss you all too. These are like all my new friends here. It's kind of fun to see everybody. So tonight, by the way, we have a very special guest. I don't know if you saw the banner that I put out on my page, but a professor, someone who I've followed for quite some time. He's on TikTok. He's one of the smartest people you'll ever meet. He's one of these people, that makes you look like you don't know what you're talking about. He just knows so much. Hello, and his name is Dr. Liam O'Mara. I guess I call him professor, but he's a doctor. He's a PhD. But you want to talk about somebody who has a lot of stuff crammed in their head. He's probably read 1,000 times more books than I have. Hey, everybody. Hello. So, it's always great to meet somebody who's like an expert at a lot of stuff, right? You can learn a lot from them. So I think what we're planning on doing, and by the way, just to let you know, this doesn't always work out perfectly. I tried to do this with Quinn a while back, and it just didn't work. So why cut out Quinn? Well, I'm going to say cut out. What I mean is I'm going to snip portions of the live out as separate videos. I'm not going to cut anybody from the video. The original video is posted right now. It's 8 hours and 15 minutes of straight through video. So if you can spare, I think Fiona was at the 1 hour and 20 minute mark. For those of you who want to go watch it afterwards, it's on my YouTube channel. It's like the first video I've put up off of my lives, but I'm going to put the rest up. I have like 60 hours of live videos. So the problem is it takes forever to upload a video. I think this one took like 3 hours to upload. It was crazy. But I think the average 2 hour video takes about an hour to upload. It's just very slow. But anyway, but I'm going to make a copy of the portion that Fiona had, put it as a separate video, and I'm going to do the same thing with Quinn's segments. So that way, if you don't want to watch the whole thing, you can just watch those segments. Excuse me, I'm having a late bowl of soup. Anyway, so I was on somebody's live today, this morning or midday, and man, I've never had anybody say this guy got really upset. They were talking about left versus right politics. When I first came on, they were telling some guy who was a Trumper. And this guy really talked down to this Trump guy. He's like, listen, man, you don't know what you're talking about. The Democrats are way better. And I was just listening, like, okay. It's a lentil vegetable soup. And I was like, okay. So I came on. And then while we were talking, I was just trying to share my point of view. And the guy told me he told me to S the F up because he got a little angry, I guess. And he said, you're an effing moron. That's what he said to me. And then he had a co-host. And then eventually the co-host who was listening to me the whole time but wasn't speaking said, you know what? I think this guy's got some real points. And then eventually the host came around and he kind of said sorry. But, different styles, right? But I've never once, even if I totally disagree with somebody, I've never once told them anything like that. That's a little over the top. But maybe he just had a bad moment. Anyway, so yeah, that happened. That was kind of fun. He wasn't a Trumper. He was arguing that the Democratic Party is far better in terms of advocating for the people. One of the points I was trying to get out, we never got to it, was a question that I asked them. I don't know if you all know this. Who takes the most corporate money now? Hello. Hey, Sheila. Yeah, it's good evening. Yeah, but yeah, good afternoon or all. Yeah, a busy day today. Yeah, but most people don't know this. The Democratic Party now takes more money from corporations than Republicans do. Pretty notable, huh? So I don't know. I think that's notable because you always think of the Democrats as being like the ones that are at least trying to fight back a little bit for the regular person, but not anymore. Not anymore. Okay, let me make my way over to my desk. Look out, dog. I already fed you. I'm not feeding you again. I think I got to watch the dog because the dog will eat my meal if I don't move it. There we go. Okay, let me put on my light and we'll get in front of the camera here. Yeah, I usually let about 10 minutes pass, let people filter in. Listen, everything plays a role, all these different influences. The point I was trying to make, you've all heard me talk about this before if you've been following me for a while, but let me turn that light off in the kitchen. Sorry, one sec. Hold on, baby, hold on. You want to say hi to the crowd, Ruby? Want to say hi to everybody? There she is. There's Ruby. She's cutie, isn't she? Yeah, so, the point I was trying to make during that live visit was, it's nice to vote. Listen, there's nothing wrong with voting, right? I mean, you can go do it. I kind of liken voting to the recycling for save the environment. It's not a bad thing to recycle. I still do it. I can't bring myself to throw, aluminum cans or paper in the regular trash. Just used to doing it. But, we've been conditioned to think that these little virtue signal things will make a big difference. But a lot of times, unfortunately, they don't. So the argument was rather than fight left and right and, bicker about stupid stuff, why don't we pick the 2 or 3 things that we all agree upon for the most part? Like people want healthcare without having to spend a fortune. People want decent education for their kids and maybe even college. And then they probably want to have a system that isn't based on cronyism and crony capitalism, right? They may not even want capitalism. They want to take care of the world. Like they don't want to screw the environment, right? And then on top of that, they don't want to have such a huge wealth gap where very few people have a lot of stuff. I think most people who aren't at the very top of society or who's a sociopath says that, right? So, well, I'll get to the point. Somebody says, Bobby, whatever, what's your plan? So, yeah, I'll get to that. So, it's not my plan per se, by the way. It's just a different path. I would be very arrogant if I thought I was the only person who kind of thought this way or figured it out. So, there's a lot of ways to reform things, right? The problem is the path to reform right now. Hey, Ruby, please no, makes a lot of noise, baby. The path to reform right now is through the electoral system. And Ruby, come here. It's too much noise, baby. Sorry to take your toy, but not right now. So we've been voting, and we're hoping that we vote for a better person and eventually better people will get in, better meaning do more things for the constituents and not for the power structure. And it just doesn't seem to change. And we're like, well, Dan, what do we got to do? Vote for third party? Do we have to have ranked choice voting? Do we have to have a whole new party system? What are we going to do? Well, obviously, any of those things are going to take a lot of time. Everything's going to take time, right? But if you believe that the dynamics can change somehow, I like to use this as an example. So imagine the power structure, which is a combination of several factors. Okay, you have the moneyed interest, the really wealthy donor class, right? They make all these big donations to super PACs and stuff like that. And if you don't know what a super PAC is, it's a political action committee which bundles money from a lot of high net worth donors. And then they are not supposed to coordinate with individual candidates or campaigns. Hey, Ruby, hey, get on your bed. Quit whining. And then, sorry about that. And whoever gets the most money to run, they run all the TV advertisements, stuff like that. 98% of the time, whichever candidate gets the most money spent on their campaign, they win. So if you can get the super PACs to give money to your campaign, you're way ahead, right? So politics is about survival, right? The first thing you have to do is get reelected. So the second force that weighs down on that are the interest groups. We know about APAC. Every industry has an interest group. Like the oil industry, pharmacy, the whole thing. And then you have the national security media industrial complex, right? You have, the major media companies, all the games that get played as far as conditioning the public. You have, the different versions of censorship, which we're now seeing here. And then you have lying by omission, which is basically giving people part of the picture, but not the whole picture. And then you add into that the rules. So what's constitutionally enshrined now? You have corporate personhood. And I don't know about you, I don't consider corporations people. And then you have money is speech. Money now is free speech. So you can't limit the amount of money people can spend on donations of these super PACs. The super PACs aren't supposed to coordinate directly with the campaigns. That's the law. But let's face it, one way or the other, whether they talk directly or indirectly through a lobbyist or whatever, the bottom line is the money gets spent where it needs to go to accomplish whatever the mission is, right? So I like to refer to that power structure, those elements that come to bear onto the way that voting works and the way people work once they're elected as the mud pit. Some people call it the swamp, but they call it the mud pit. And remember, you got a very permanent member of the internal apparatus of the State Department, the 3-letter agencies. Some people call that the deep state or the permanent system. That's a real thing. So, If you want to deny that, try being a foreign leader who wants to help your country. You're going to find out who they are pretty quick. So, okay, so we've laid out what the challenges are, right? Good point, Bobby. I mean, you're probably waiting, like, when is this guy going to tell us the answer? First of all, there isn't an easy answer, okay? This is like climbing Mount Everest 3 times over in the same day with no oxygen, right? It's going to be tough. It's going to be almost impossible, I think. And I think when Liam comes on tonight, if and when we get together here, I've heard him speak to this before, Professor, Liam O'Mara, sorry. And it's the same conclusion, right? It's very difficult to overcome these challenges, but there's always a possibility, right? Otherwise, you'd give up hope. So anything's possible. It's just like, again, it's just like trying to unionize, right? You're not going to convince the owners of a company to give you a better deal. You're going to have to put some pressure on them to get a better deal. So people ask, well, how does it get done? If we can't vote our way out of it, what next then, right? Okay, well, imagine you're in a union and voting is very similar to going to work overtime and asking nicely to negotiate with the company for a better deal. That's voting. Okay, you do it over and over again. The company says, yeah, whatever, and they don't give you a better deal. So now you're faced with, what do I do then? Like, what do I do? I can quit, which isn't a good option because now you don't have a job anymore or an income. Or you can try to put pressure on the company by using the tools that you have that they don't, which is the sheer number of employees, right? There's more employees than management. They depend on your labor. And then society-wise, we have a couple other things that are important. We have the sheer numbers, which I mentioned. You have your labor, and then you have your purchasing power, right? So you can not buy anything for a period of time, which obviously from a company wouldn't make as big of a difference. But if all of us nationwide pretended we're in a big union called us, the people, and the company is the U.S. power structure, like the government with the management systems I just mentioned, how do you get them to change? They're not going to do it willingly. You can't call up a billionaire and say, you know what, I've been looking at things, and I would really appreciate it if you would do whatever you could to change things. Somebody says became the new title gifter. Oh, that's a gifter. So I said grifter. So you can ask nicely, right? And I would imagine they're going to turn you down. They would say, no, thank you. I like the status quo the way it is. So they're not going to do it willingly. And it's probably going to be very unwillingly. Let's put it that way. If you're in power, you wouldn't want to do that, right? So believe it or not, right now they have everybody right where they want us, okay? They're squeezing the money from the bottom up. They have people arguing and bickering over social issues while ignoring the one or two things they have that everybody agrees with in common. And so therefore, when people are fighting, just like with the funding of the H group by the Netanyahu crowd, it's a divide and conquer thing. The people aren't going to have time to get together and do the thing that would benefit them because they're too busy fighting each other. So that would have to stop, obviously, to some extent, and enough people would have to look across the aisle and go, you know what, I don't like X, Y, Z about your politics, but we do agree on these two things, so let's figure it out if we can work together. Same thing from the other side. I don't like your Trumperism, but when you organize a union at Amazon, for example, and you're going to try to make more money or get more benefits, you don't have a litmus test that says, hey, if you want to join the union, you can't like Trump. Or, hey, you can't be somebody who supports transgenders or you can't join. That's not how it works. You look away from the other stuff and you basically put aside your differences while you work towards common goals, because they say politics makes strange bedfellows, right? So what would it look like? Theoretically, again, I'm not advocating for this because I want to be very clear. I'm no leader. I'm not some rabble rouser. But this is what makes sense to me from just, you try to think about what are the possibilities, right? Like, what would it look like? What would the playing field look like if this stuff were to occur? I mean, I imagine it would look something like this. You have to have a decentralized movement because you can't have any one or two or three leaders because then those guys go to jail and that's that, right? The whole thing falls apart. But let's say you had 100,000 different people that organize small communities across the country, which sounds about right, small towns or cities or whatever. And, those are 100,000 people. There's no one person or even a small group to, get in trouble because everyone's involved to whatever extent. So it would look kind of like this, I would guess. You would have a series of escalatory tactics using the tools we outlined, which is the number of people, the buying power, as well as the labor. You can withhold your labor. And it's not about unionizing. That was the argument today with this person I talked to, not the argument, but the dialogue. And his point was, unionization is the path to get it done. And my point is, it's not going to make a difference because, first of all, corporations, when you try to unionize, they make it their life mission to stop you because that hurts profits, right? And you don't always get the job done. I know somebody who does union organizing, and it's not hard. It's hard to get every single person in a group to say yes to that because you got to give money out of your paycheck to pay dues, and some people just don't want to do it. They don't see it working or whatever. So I think the path to doing this is not through unionizing, although that's not a bad thing if you can do it, because it might make your personal situation better with you and your coworkers. But It's not big enough and broad enough, and it doesn't have enough scale to make a big enough difference, an impact on those who have power. So what would? What would make a difference is if you could get enough critical density of people. They say it's between 3.5% and 4% of the total working population, which is in this case probably about, I'm guessing, about 10 or 12 million people, I guess would be the number, somewhere in that neighborhood. And that doesn't sound too big compared to 335 million, but believe me, it's tough to get that many people to agree to do anything, right? So having said all that, what would it look like? Okay, so first of all, you'd have to have some safety net for everybody, right? Just like the union has a union fund, they collect those dues. People who agree to participate in some kind of general labor withholding, sometimes called a general strike, and their websites talking about this very thing, they have a fund and they raise money ahead of time. People who can afford to give do, those who can't don't. And the idea is that as this thing takes whatever path it takes, people who would normally fall through the cracks economically don't, because there's these like this support net. That's called mutual aid. That's what it's called in this kind of thing, mutual aid. And it may not be perfect. Probably very little of this is going to be perfect. I'm just laying out the basic tenets of it. You can do with it what you want. So then secondly, there would be an agreed upon set of steps and tactics that are escalatory. So you wouldn't break out, your Minuteman musket right away and go running down the street, right? You would start with something like maybe having a petition and say, hey, if this doesn't work, this is plan B and this is going to be plan C. And they may say, we don't want you to go down. We'll make some concessions now. Probably unlikely. And then you ramp up the next one. It's like you just keep ratcheting up the process until something gives. It may not give at all, but the idea is to have those things agreed upon by everybody. Like this is step A, this is step B, this is C, D, E, F, and G, right? And we're going to go down that same path, all of us the same way. And then you have a series of very specific and very impactful demands or desired outcomes. So maybe have 3 to 5 things at the most, not even that many maybe. So maybe, get money out of politics. So you have to get rid of Citizens United and the corporate personhood bullshit. Maybe have no more crony capitalism or lobbying by corporations, right? And maybe let the public revoke corporate charters if they misbehave, right? And then you might have to have more egalitarian tax policy or something, whatever's going to make the playing field better for everybody, like make the system serve the public, basically, right? Something like that. So listen, people are going to have to kind of, iron that stuff out and figure out what they want to do. There's a group that I created that plugs into this thinking called Action for Change. You can go on my link in bio, which is my link tree, and you can check it out. And it's just another little 1,000 points of light, so to speak, where people from this community can get involved and talk about it, right? It's not going to be no one's going to wave a magic wand and make all this happen. It's going to be all of us pitching in to some extent to kind of form this amoeba of activity that's going to be able to do what it's going to do if it can do it. And then, there's going to be things at time where people are going to say, okay, we got to do step C. C can become less pleasant because you have to take some risks, right? You may not keep your job, for example. You may lose your job because maybe you say something online and somebody sees it. You're just like what's happening now. People have been fired for making a pro-Palestine comment. Well, you may support whatever this thing becomes, and maybe somebody kicks you out for that, right? But the point is, no change that's ever been good has come by, electing people. So people don't work their way in a system to change a system. It doesn't happen like that. Because right now, the power structure owns that system. They have every last little nook and cranny of it completely covered. They have the Congress, they have the judiciary, they've stacked the Supreme Court that's pro-corporate. They have the police, the military, the executive branch, the national security apparatus. They got the whole the media system. It's all the same thing. So I'll put it to you this way. Let's just say, for example, if you knew that everybody who goes into Congress was going to go into a mud pit, for example, figuratively, and one person wears a beige jumpsuit, the other person wears a white jumpsuit, and I'll pick the white one this time, right? So the white person goes in, and what happens? They get muddy, right? They get stuck in this stuff, the quicksand / mud. You're like, okay, 2 years later, okay, I don't like the white person. They didn't do it in a white uniform. I'm going to go with the beige uniform this time. And they run into the same mud pit. Guess what? They get dirty. They get sucked in. And you're like, well, damn, what do I do? So you get a third person to go that has like a purple suit, right? What do they jump into the same mud pit. What happens? Same problem, right? At what point are you going to realize that if you go with A, B, or even a C, that the same thing keeps happening? And when are you going to, so it's like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me 17 times, shame on me. Now, that's a big nut to swallow, right? That the elections won't overcome the societal problems. I can't say for sure. I guess it's possible that if we vote this time, that something magical will happen that's different than the last 10 times, but I doubt it. And I think if you really look at it objectively like that, you'll say, okay, well, that sucks. But that other path is going to take a lot of work. That sounds like a lot of pain in the ass, Chip. Yeah, I agree. And it's also a big climb. So for whoever was asking me earlier, I remember the person's name. She was asking me over and over again, like, what's next? So nobody wants to hear that, right? But it means that Netflix got to turn off the Netflix. It means you got to stop watching NFL football. You got to go talk to people. You got to get busy doing stuff you probably would rather not do. It's like cooking all your own food 24/7. It's like not fun. But if any of this, by the way, just to let you know, I personally don't think that much of it will happen. And you're like, well, why is that? Why? I'm not that I'm pessimistic. It's just that knowing how people are conditioned, especially in the United States, to look at their civic duty of voting being the path to overcoming the challenges that are presented to them. I mean, I was listening to that live today, and everyone was arguing back and forth, like why the Democrats are going to get the job done, or why they never done before. Why would they do it now? Like, what, are you just not seeing that? So anyway, listen, I believe that the answer to all of our problems is to go away from this highly centralized federal system down to localized communities and destroy most of that stuff because it doesn't work well for the people. It's gotten co-opted, right? So if you feel differently and you have a different path that you think is more effective, I'm open to listening to it. But the point that I tried to raise with this guest host today that I was with was, unionizing is great. It sounds great, but first of all, it's very difficult. It's a difficult path to organize people into a union in the first place. And secondly, even if you do use the tools available to you, you don't always get what you want anyway. Sometimes the companies will shut down, like Walmart, they'll shut down an entire store before they let it become unionized. They'll just shut it down. They'll shut down 20 if they have to. Then everybody loses their job, right? So that doesn't work too well. So Liam says he's waiting. Yeah, okay, give me a second. So he's let me do a host live request here. Here we go. I'm going to invite him. I don't know if that's a live invite. It should be. Let's see if Liam comes in. So yeah, that's the point. Hey, Liam. Can you hear me okay?
Howdy. Yeah, I can't figure out what's going on with the camera today. My eyes have got these blue boxes floating around in them.
That's okay. We still get the gist of it. It's all good. So yeah,
Yeah.
Mr. Blue Eyes. That's kind of cool. Yeah, let me pull it up here.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah.
first of all, welcome. I mean, this is exciting because I reached out to Liam about a week ago, I guess, and he's a very busy, very smart academic professor with lots of letters after his name and stuff, which means he knows a lot of stuff. He's read a lot of stuff. But Liam also has cats on his broadcast, which I love seeing him when he has his cats crawling all over him, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of Liam's because he's a bastion of knowledge. I think he has a good critical thinking skill set that really, he puts things into words again that makes it easy for us to understand. And I think his takes are very well rounded. So that's why I thought the audience would really enjoy listening to him. And if you're not following him, please tap on Liam's box and then bring up his account and follow him because he goes live quite a bit. And I think now because he's between sessions with his college activity, he has a little more time to do it more regularly. So it's a real joy to listen to him. I'm telling you, there are very few people who I follow lives, and he's one of them. I always try to catch it. So that's good stuff. And, I've heard Liam talk about this very issue. We were just talking, Liam, about the chances of there being some sort of an alternative path outside of voting to reform the systems that are kind of backed up in the United States. And I've heard you talk about this before, about the likelihood that you think is some kind of revolution or something could happen and how challenging it's going to be. So anyway, before we do that, how about if you just share a little bit about your background so we understand who you are and how you came to be on TikTok and that kind of thing?
Oh gosh. Yeah. Never knew where to start with a question like my background. So I was a working class kid, first person in my family to go to college at all, and somehow I went straight through to a PhD because I'm stupid. But I didn't even start till I was 30. So I used to be a longshoreman and truck driver. I've done a number of other careers in between, like picking up money here and there, but finally got into college, went straight through, and now I get to do what I love: corrupt the youth. So it kind of better suits me since I have always read. I'm one of those hyperlexic autistic savants that are just kind of completely clueless about social relations and what the hell I'm supposed to do in any given moment. What day is it? What day is it? But I have no problem quoting books I read 30 years ago. And yeah, I've just finally found a career where I get to use some of that. I get to actually work within some of that material and try to inspire other people to kind of like, I don't know, get excited about things because I'm always excited to learn something new. This career endlessly challenges me in that way, so I think it's just fascinating.
That's
Uh,
really cool. Now, for those of you who don't know what you do, and I don't even know exactly what you do, what is your, you don't have to tell us where you do it, but what is the role you do and who do you work with?
well, I'm a history professor. Um, so my discipline is intellectual history or cultural history, so the history of ideas and how they transmit from place to place and move around. So I study big systems of thought. So it gets me studying like religion and economics and all kinds of stuff. But I focus in terms of regions because you pick regional foci as a historian, and my regional foci are the Middle East and Europe. So basically the Mediterranean basin writ large. So basically my expertise runs from I guess the fringes of South Asia, all the way across to the Atlantic. Um, and it's kind of like my playground. I get to touch on a little bit outside of that in my kind of world history classes, which is fun. I do a number of like thematic world history classes, but I mostly focus in that area. But yeah, I'm a history professor. I teach at two universities. One of them gives me more Europe, one of them gives me more Mideast, so it's a nice way to balance out my life. And I do a lot of commuting because I live on a mountain. I I decided I was kind of over living around people, so I took over and been restoring my grandfather's old cabin that my mother had held on to, and turning it
Hmm,
into a house a bit at a time. So that's been a lot of fun projects. I've kind of lived
cool.
outside the city for the last 15 some years, but I lived out, well, no, closer to 20, but I lived out in the desert for a while. And I just moved from the high desert up into the mountains.
So I guess you don't have to worry about pesky neighbors bothering you, right? You have a little bit of a place of your own to hang out. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I mean, not much. I mean, there are a few people around. In fact, I'm closer to people here than I was in a place in the desert where my closest neighbor was a mile away. Here, I actually live on a street with other houses around, but it's still in a very small community. And a lot of the houses up here are owned by people who use them as cabins, so they're part timers anyway. So a lot of the houses are just quiet all the time, and I don't have things like street lights or crap like that. So I get to step outside and just stars, and that just
Yeah, the stargazing, that sounds beautiful. That must be great to see the stars like that.
yeah, it recharges my batteries, I guess, because I enjoy a lot of what I do. I'm honestly fascinated that I was any good at it because I didn't know if I'd be okay as a lecturer or not. But I really enjoy it. I get kind of into it. I'm very enthusiastic about it. But I'm drained by the end of the day. I'm like, okay, I'm over it. I want to retreat to my mountain fortress with my cats and just hang out. And yeah, I'm up past 6,000 feet. So I've got a clear view of stars. Very quiet out, just in the wildlife. So it kind of like gets me back in my happy place before I have to go
Now,
back to the city.
now here's everyone's gonna. Did you ever get recruited to play in ZZ Top? Did it ever happen?
Mm. Yeah, this is fun. I haven't seen my chin in 30 years or so, but I've changed my beard style a lot over the years. I actually had it considerably longer than this for a while and in three braids. But then I cut it real short and had it short for a couple of years. And then I said, screw it, I'm going to grow it back out. So this is the third year of growing back out.
Wow. Okay, so that's 3 years worth of growth right there.
It's let's see. Yeah, it's yeah, gosh, almost exactly 3 years. Yep, yeah, this is 3 years.
Wow. Now, if you wanted to, you could give up teaching history and you could just become you could, I guess, you could color your beard and be a Santa, right? You had to
I
be.
don't think they make any money, but
Not the
I
good
mean,
ones, not the ones that don't rob banks. They're the Santas that make the money, I think.
I used to threaten people like this would be the height of, I guess, humor for me would be to be a disgruntled Jewish Santa, just like wear the Santa suit with a kippah, and then just like curse at everybody in Yiddish and talk about how this party is trash and everything is bad and all the gifts are going to be bad and everyone's going to have a bad time. Just kvetch the entire time. I think that would be hella fun. I would do that,
Yeah.
but
No, that sounds good.
but I don't think
No,
being a
no.
mall Santa would be a lot of fun.
So a couple things just in general. So, I mean, obviously you've been taking probably a very close look at what's happening since October the 7th with a very careful eye, given it fits into your knowledge of the overall long-term history of the conflict and what's happened prior to that. Before we get into that territory, I was mentioning to the audience before you came over that I was on someone else's live today, and they were talking about retail politics. And the host was saying, arguing with somebody who was a pro-Trump person, why he was convinced that the Democratic Party would do better by the average citizen than a Trump presidency would do. And so when I came on as a guest, and of course I've been disabused of that concept for many decades, that there's much of a difference between the two parties. I don't know how you feel. We can always go over that too. But my sense is, I call it the power structure, because of the fact that you have the national security state, you have the war machine, you have the finance system with the banks, you have the moneyed interests that lobby Congress with the donor class, the super PACs, and then you have the special interest groups like the APACs and others of the world. That between all of those forces, I like to call it the mud pit or the swamp. It's like a quicksand thing, and whether you wear a beige uniform, a white uniform, or a light blue uniform, you're going to go in there and you're going to get covered in mud no matter what you come in with, as good as you may be. So how do you feel about that? And do you think that that's a good assessment, or how do you see it differently?
Good assessment in the sense of, money and power corrupting everything and the two parties being trash.
Yeah, in other words, the argument was basically that voting in normal elections is probably has a less chance of fixing the problem than if we
Oh,
continue to vote the same we have been.
yeah. Okay, so the way voting works for me in this country is essentially as strategic harm reduction. You can play the lesser evil and there will be fewer people who are hurt by it, but it's not going to make anything any better. It just depends on the area you're looking at, right? So in some areas, they're essentially the same. So in terms of our decline in our civil liberties, for example, in overall freedoms, surveillance state, everything else, or policing, both parties are equally driving us to hell. Um, in terms of wealth inequality, both parties are equally driving us to hell. In terms of dismantling the welfare state, the Republicans are taking us straight down, and when Democrats come in, it kind of like plateaus a little bit. They tend not to take away as much. They do erode it. Clinton eroded a little bit. Carter actually started the process of unraveling the New Deal, but they don't nibble away as much. The Republicans would slash everything if they could. So preserving some elements of social democracy, the Democrats are better on that one, at least. In terms of war, it's more like a 60-40. Republicans are definitely worse in that, but Democrats definitely get us into plenty of fucked up shit, too. So you can't really say that they're identical, but they're both equally compromised by moneyed interests. They are both driving us into the ground in terms of civil liberties and economy. They're both imperialists. They're both racist. But one of them wants to hold on to a little bit more of the welfare state and preserve some of the basic quality of life. Because, American standard of living has been falling for a long time. We've been out of the top 20 for a long time. All these, like, greatest country on earth. We are out of the top 20 in everything except for the bad shit. So every positive metric of socioeconomic health, we're out of the ranking entirely. But but it would be faster if the far right was completely in charge economically. So it's more a matter of helping. And then there's some differences, at least on a local level too. A lot of people who get in, I want to be fair here. Plenty of people who get into Democratic politics are genuinely good people. Some of them are kind of deluded in their ideas, but I've met a lot of really good people who really do. They kind of understand what's going on. They kind of understand how it's hurting people, and they really want to help. But it's the system kind of constrains them. On a local level, they actually can do some good. So on city councils, county boards of supervisors, even state houses, Democrats used to control nearly all the state houses in this country. Republicans have a clear majority of them now. And that's had a huge impact on the way this entire country is run. Those lower level offices, Democrats, I think, generally did a better job. But at the federal level, they get sucked into, as you say, the swamp. And there's not much you can do.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Now, as far as the perception among the American public, and how they see where things are, whether they, first of all, recognize the very things we're alluding to as far as what the real power structure is, but in terms of their perception of what their role is in terms of maybe trying to change things. Where do you think most people are? And is that on purpose from a media slash propaganda system, or is that just the way things have always been? Or how do you feel about that?
I would say most people have one or the other position between voting is good or there's nothing anybody can do about anything and you've lost all hope. Um, and that I think both of those are actually deliberate because it's if you can systematically disempower people, if you can convince them that they cannot be agents of real change and that they have to turn things over to authorities, for example. So we don't intervene in our own neighborhoods. We don't look out for each other the same way. We don't help out our neighbors. We don't form the kind of mutual aid networks that humans have done for millennia, countless millennia. Well, I mean, literally 2 million years if you get back to like the first humans. But, in terms of like our kind of environment, at least as long as Homo sapiens have been around, we have looked out for each other. And in all of our earlier complex societies, we did that too because the state actually didn't do much. It generally was there for taxation and war. It didn't do much beyond that. But we have been convinced that the state will take care of things and we should leave that to the police, leave that to government, whatever there. And then when government seems like it's completely incompetent, sclerotic, unable to do anything useful, then people either vote harder or they drop out entirely, thinking that there's nothing they can really do. And keeping people feeling that they don't have a voice and that they don't have real power is quite deliberate because it entrenches the existing power structure. It means they don't have to actually change anything.
And so, in terms of people being contacted by either the Democratic Party or a particular candidate requesting donations to them, do you think it's sort of futile to donate money to particular candidates or the DCCC, for example, or do you think that's something people should still consider doing?
Oh, I think the only thing that the DNC, DCCC, I think that they deserve maybe like wrapped bricks in the mail. That's about it. I don't think that they deserve any of their money because I don't think they do any damn good for anybody. Where you can do real good with political donations is supporting the small dollar candidates that they hate. Because the D-Trip and the DNC do not want leftists to win office, but there's nothing in bylaws, the existing laws, constitution, anything that could possibly prevent actual leftists from running as Democrats. And plenty of people actually do. They just can't get the support to rise above money-wise, but if people donate like, a recurring donation the price of a coffee a month, and enough people do that, then these small dollar candidates actually can really get ahead. And your money can actually go farthest at the local races. So again, city councils, county boards of supervisors, state assembly. But even for Congress, it actually doesn't take as much to unseat an incumbent as people tend to think. But you do have to pass a certain threshold to be able to get out there and get yourself in front of enough people and seem viable, like it's worth taking the shot on you when it comes to voting time. And if you can do that, more seats can be taken. And really, a lot of people give shit to the like the squad type, and some of them are more liberal than leftist, but I think that the trick there is it's creating you can tip the balance. Once you have enough people, that are outside of this the kind of like DLC right wing ideology they've had since the 60s and 70s. Once you have enough people in there against that, then the rest will kind of sign up because they don't want to lose their seats, and you can actually pass some serious reforms that change the system. But as long as there's only a handful of them, they have to play ball in order to survive at all. Otherwise, they'll dump millions into primaries, they'll chase them out, and then you have to start the whole process all over again. So while they're there, there's some criticism justifiable to people for kind of like kowtowing to political party structures, but they realistically can't do anything else if there's half a dozen of them, But if you get 100 of them in there, you see the difference there? So if enough people made those, small donations to enough of the small dollar candidates to swamp these things in the primaries and replace these motherfuckers on the ballots and put good people in there, then you can actually pass some real legislation. But It's not easy. There's nothing easy about this, but at least
Yeah, you're right.
it's theoretically possible. There is a path to it. It's just, it's a tough one.
So somebody in the comments named Rihanna, I'm not sure how you say the name. If I messed it up, I apologize. Says less talk, do something! Exclamation point. And that's an important thing to point out. Action is obviously what makes a difference. So a couple points to share before I let Liam answer my next question, and that is one. It's a very large number. I don't know the exact number. I think it's like 97 or 96 or maybe even 98% of the time the candidate who gets most money spent on their behalf because of the advertising dollars, name recognition, all that stuff, and the canvassing and all that stuff, they win. So if you have money coming in from the public, like the Bernie $5, $25 stuff coming in, and let's say that adds up to 20 million bucks, and the establishment spends 100 million, it's a hard thing to overcome, right? Even with our best efforts, sometimes it's hard to overcome. The good news about running for office, even at the federal level, is that somebody gets to at least have their voice heard while they're running, which can make a difference sometimes as well, right? We know certain people probably aren't going to be elected president, like Marianne Williamson or Cornel West, but they're great people to hear from, and their messages and their thoughts are much better than the establishment in many cases, which can then seed certain things down the road, right? Which is a good thing. So what I wanted to ask Liam next is, in terms of militarism and the foreign adventures that we see our country involved in, both covertly and overtly, and all the money that's been earmarked for these various foreign wars like Ukraine and Israel and others, what do you think of that versus people? A lot of people are saying that the people at home aren't being helped out who need it. We got people who are homeless. We got people from Hawaii who lost their homes in the fires. They got $700. How do you feel about the fact that the political process is gearing towards serving that establishment and not the population?
Well, honestly, that's kind of our fault. Most Americans don't pay much attention to foreign policy. There's a small vocal minority who do, and people tend to overestimate that. I got in a lot of heated debates with people in the '04 race because I knew so many people who were just like, "Oh, this Iraq war is terrible. W is going to go down. We're going to let Kerry." I'm like, "No, you're not. Wartime presidents win. Most Americans don't give a shit about foreign policy. They're just going to rally around the flag. You're going to lose. Kerry's a terrible candidate." And Kerry lost badly. W actually
No.
won with a minority of the vote the first time. He won by several million the second time around. Um, it's it's something that most Americans just don't care about. And until more Americans care that they live in an evil empire that's perfectly happy to slaughter people abroad, we're going to keep doing it. I mean, because at the end of the day, we're the only people who can change that. I mean, it's sad. It's one of the things that, I mean, honestly, foreign affairs is one of the first things that got me involved in history as a kid. Like just kind of being curious about all this stuff. I mean, hearing about some of our interventions and wondering why would we do that? What does that have to do with us? Why are we
Sure.
invading Grenada? Like, what is going on here? And yeah, it's really kind of amazing that decade after decade, Americans prove that they just don't give a shit how many people are killed in their name. And then they wonder why do people hate Americans? I mean, well, they generally don't hate Americans. They hate American foreign policy, and they probably don't like the Americans who don't care about American foreign policy. And that's kind of the point, I mean, we do have some responsibility. I don't know, take it back to like yeah, I love like the whole like that Eisenhower speech, his last statement in 1960, like we need an alert and knowledgeable citizenry to avoid the military industrial complex getting out of control. Dude helped to create it. He funneled so much cash to that thing, but
Yeah.
he's kind of right at the end of the day that it exists as long as we allow it to. And we simply let it go on to a point where it's very difficult to disentangle it at this point.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it is a tough thing. And so, obviously, I think one of the things people have had the hardest time with right now is they've watched what's been happening, many of whom haven't even haven't heard about the issue before, or if they had, they didn't know exactly the depths to which the Israeli government will go to do what it wants to do. And the photographs and videos that have been flowing through avenues like TikTok and Instagram and others has bypassed the traditional, media that has kept this stuff from the public for many decades. So people are sort of like shocked. They're like completely aghast at what they're seeing, and they're kind of angry. They're speaking out vocally. They're going to protest. They're refusing to buy Starbucks coffee or watch Disney Plus or whatever the case may be, doing what they can. But they also realize that by calling their elected officials or even going to stand in the hallways of Congress, that they're just not responding to their outrage. So, what role do you think, one, that AIPAC or other lobbying groups plays on that dynamic? And then in terms of people not being aware or not caring about foreign policy, obviously pocketbook issues tend to drive people's decisions above all else. But does the media and the propaganda system and the purposeful ignorance play a role in that as well?
Let's see. Hold on a second. I need to make a note. I don't know if I'm going to be able to read that. Okay, so then we've got AIPAC, pocket members. Okay.
By the way, you don't have to answer all of it. That was a pretty tough question.
Yeah, the first thing I was thinking about as you're kind of going through this is that we like to think that being more informed through TikTok has a real effect and that there are more of us now, but realistically, I don't see any evidence of that yet. Like there's nothing statistical showing that. And you've had tons of issues before where millions of people have been in the streets. Look at the protests before the Iraq war started. People are like, no, this is stupid. Iraq has nothing to do with this. And there were people out in the streets in a dozen countries, millions and millions of people. Governments all just said and did it anyway. They don't care. Like it didn't matter. I mean, there's tons of places where we've had this kind of knowledge, and the ability to spread this around has been there for quite a while. Hell, the only reason we started to see anything in the 2011 Arab uprisings was that internet collectives started pushing stories because the major media just ignored it, and tried to suppress it so that the police states could do their traditional work of crushing people. But you had people pushing the videos of the self-immolations and saying, hey, we should pay attention to this. And finally, media started picking up. So they had to change the narrative a bit, and still in the end got to keep their police states. But it still put them on the back foot for a minute. You can have an effect, but that was a relatively small number of people. The total numbers involved are always quite small because most people honestly just don't care about this. And most people you grab on the streets, it doesn't matter how many pictures of unalived babies you show them, they're just not going to care what's happening to Palestinians any more than they were going to care about what was happening in Eastern Congo or in Burma or anywhere else that people are being, unalived in huge numbers. I mean, yeah. People just aren't going to respond the way we want them to. And I think if we really want to organize effectively for change, I think one thing that would really help is if we take off some of the rose-colored glasses. Bad joke because my eyes are like showing all kinds of weird colors. But if we don't look at this in the sense that, yeah, this is going to be different, man, and they're going to see our voices and it'll finally matter and there's more of us and we're going to spread the message. No, it doesn't work that way. But small numbers of people organizing effectively for change have constantly changed the world. So the numbers themselves don't really matter. The tactics and strategy, those two matter. So I think that's the bigger issue there. So if you're expecting that enough of us are going to, we're not going to go to Starbucks and that's somehow going to change Starbucks' policy. No, they're not going to give a shit. In the end, they're going to go where the overall profit is. And most Americans aren't going to care long term about this. Most companies, aren't going to follow along. I mean, you can't make a company woke, no matter what the right says about them. They follow the dollars. It's all about marketing and the bottom line. And most of us don't care enough. Boycotts have historically struggled, but you can actually organize enough people to put pressure in certain areas, and you can actually push back against things. So I don't want to give the impression here that I'm saying it's that the low numbers make it hopeless. Quite the opposite. I mean, hell, people constantly overthrown governments around the world with relatively small portions of the population. Most people are just never going to care. It's never been a barrier if you organize properly. As far as AIPAC being the big obstacle, I think that's an illusion, honestly, because AIPAC is one of a bazillion, awful PACs there. They're all doing the same kind of work. It's not even it's not even the biggest source of money on this big issue, because there's a ton of money coming in from evangelical groups that all have the same exact policies toward Israel, and their money comes in. The reason that they take that money is that they already have a political reason to support it. If they had a principled objection and already had a good reason not to be involved, then the money wouldn't sway them. The money, it flows to people because their interests align already. When we start pointing to things like AIPAC, especially when we point specifically to that and not to the massive range of other wealthy interests that have been manipulating American politics for, at least the last century and a half, corporations have controlled all of our elections since the late 19th century. When we start pointing to that, it veers very, very close to anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about, the control of Jewish money. And that not only, it not only runs up against a factual problem, but a serious, ethical one. The simple fact is, people in Congress vote the way they do and take the money that they do because they already have reasons to support that and to take that money. And those are the places we need to focus in that issue. Now, taking all of the money out of politics in general, yeah, I'm right there with you. How we pull that off, there's a way to do it, but it's a very hard road, right?
Yeah, it's a tough path. Constitutional amendments are very long, tough
uphill
uphill battles.
From the state level, because the federal government isn't going to initiate it. But there is a constitutional path to it if you can take control of enough state houses, and that's the trick there. That's why I said focus on lower elections, because that was the Republican strategy starting in the 50s. They started taking control of city councils and then state houses and worked their way up. They were a minority for decades. And their ideas were completely discredited. So they started at the grassroots. If you do the same thing, if you take control of those lower levels and you work your way back up, take control of the states, there's a path to eventually get the money out of politics. Not an easy one, not a quick one. But that will get rid of AIPAC. Nothing is going to get rid of AIPAC until that point, because it serves a function that Congress wants. And that's where you need to focus our attention. What are the real interests? Why do they serve this? Why do they align with Israel? And how do we change that dynamic? If you change that, then AIPAC's money doesn't buy them a damn thing. You could walk in there with $1 billion and say, I want us to align with Cuba's politics, support Cuba, yay Cuba, and here's $1 billion. No one would take that money. They just wouldn't.
Yeah, it just doesn't fit into the power structure and the interests of too many groups, like you said. So just real quickly, I want to do this for those. Some people filter in and out of these lives. So I just want to quickly, first of all, tell people who the heck I am. My name is Chip Barnes. I'm an ex-Army officer. I served in the first Persian Gulf War. I was on the front lines in a tank. I've been in combat. It's not a fun thing. So I can relate to what some of the people are going through in Gaza, although, of course, not to the extent of the people that are being bombed. But it's a mess, and it's not something you want to be a part of, because there's just nothing good about it, trust me. And I learned about the Israel-Palestine issue back in college quite unexpectedly. One of my classmates, delivering one of their senior thesis political science papers, had to give a talk, and it was on the First Intifada. And for those who don't know what that is, in 1987, there was this huge uprising among the Palestinian people that was put down by the Israelis. And, it just totally shattered my view of that issue, because I had always been told that Israel was the good guy. They're our friends. These bad people want to, boom, boom cafes and buses, and they're all crazy people. And the picture that I was given in this talk was totally different. It contradicted so many things that I've learned about that issue. So that's how I kind of got my bearing on this. And in terms of Liam, this is Liam O'Mara. He's a professor, PhD in history. He teaches history courses. He's an academic. He's a very well-read, very well-studied human being. Loves to talk about all the different issues. He's got a very broad range of knowledge. He's a systems-based thinker. As he thought, I kind of look at myself the same way. So many people nowadays are so specialized in their silo that they can't think about connecting the dots among all aspects of society. And I think Liam, and to some extent myself, do a better job of that than some of these pigeonholed people like that. So with that said, if you're coming in for the first time here, welcome. I go live every Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. And then I go every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday from 12 noon to 2 p.m. Liam goes live quite a bit, although I think he's a little more when he can kind of thing. He doesn't have a set schedule. And if I'm wrong, please correct me, Liam. But
yeah, it was on Friday late nights last term. It'll probably be Fridays again this coming semester, but earlier in the day. More like the late afternoon, early evening. But until beginning of February. I'm probably going to do it more often than that, but I still will regularly go live on Friday evenings.
Okay, terrific. And so again, whenever I can catch Liam's lives, I do. I really enjoy them. Usually I just sit back and listen because he has people that come up and talk, but I just prefer to listen to Liam because I think he's great. So we were talking a second ago earlier today about what's happening with the conflict and things like that. But what role do you think, Liam, does the propaganda and the media apparatus play in either the ignorance of Americans or the apathy of Americans or both?
Americans are easily the most propagandized population on Earth, which I think is kind of funny and almost ironic, given that the First Amendment technically gives us potentially the freest press in the world, because our Constitution explicitly protects the media, and we, for example, don't have effective libel laws. It's a lot easier to sue people in most countries for what you produce in the media, but the problem here is profit, and for-profit media, for-profit news tends to push them to pursue a particular niche, a particular audience. You want to sell them a story that makes them happy, which means at the end of the day, you're getting a lot of masturbatory fluff that doesn't actually enrich our understanding of the world. You're basically, here is what I think you want to feel, and here is the evidence that will support your belief system. And then if people don't feel validated by a particular channel or newspaper, they can pick up a different one. Oh yeah, this is the one that's telling the truth, just because it touches them in the feels in the right way. It's sad, but you can cut through the noise and you can find genuinely good reporting in the U.S., but it's often buried in such walls of bullshit, and oftentimes you can learn more from what they leave out than from what they include, which is why this is one of those it's one of those weird things about, just because I read so quickly, but I read a lot. I read a lot of newspapers. My weekly news source, there's 30 different news sources I take in each week, but almost all of them are outside the US. And oftentimes a lot of foreign media do a better job of looking at our politics than our own papers will. Just because
Sure.
it's not generally in the interests of those papers to criticize where their money's coming from. They're driven by advertising revenue at the end of the day. So they have to keep
Right.
the corporations happy, and they're chasing a particular audience. So they have to keep that audience happy. And if they lose either of those, they fold and they don't make money for their shareholders. And that's the concern. And that's what corporations do. Corporations exist to make money for shareholders. If you're reading a news source that is run as a corporation, then you're not the customer. You're a product that they're selling to advertisers. The customers,
Yeah.
for them, are the advertisers. They're the ones they need to please. It's
Yeah, it's amazing because I've heard this about CNN, and maybe the numbers aren't exactly right, but something like 70% of all the advertising dollars that they take in are from big pharma for pharmaceutical advertising dollars. And that's just an amazing statistic. So if that's accurate, that's crazy. And by the way, there are a number of people asking a lot of good questions in the comments. Because of the pace of this, I can't answer and bring each and every one of them up, but best I can remember your questions, I'll raise them with Liam and get his feedback. One of which was, Liam, I'll just put this out there, but for those of you, we're going to do a Q&A later, so if you can save your questions, I'll do my best to get back to you, so I apologize, I'm not ignoring you. But Liam, here's a question. Who's going to be the best presidential candidate to fix this stuff in 2024?
Candidate for what?
For president.
Well, none of them can. That's kind of the point. They different ones can make it worse, but none of them can actually fix the system. Whoever gets in as a Democrat is constrained by the existing power structures. They're constrained by the way Congress works, by the way the donors work, by the way the executive is structured. It doesn't. You can have a president who does less harm, for sure. So, I don't know, a Bernie would have done less harm, but he couldn't have actually fixed anything, because that's not what presidents do. Presidents are literally incapable of fixing problems because they don't produce laws. Anybody who's told you an executive order means anything is lied to you, because all they can do is work within existing legislation. They can't produce anything new themselves. but they can avoid enforcing certain things. So, because they have some discretion there, they can avoid asking Congress to do certain things. They can veto certain things, so they can avoid making things worse. So that's great there. But presidents, by nature, cannot fix anything, but they can make things worse, and that's where like a Trump is dangerous, because the way that they appoint so much of the federal judiciary. That's problematic. Trump, in his first term, appointed about 25% of the existing federal judiciary because the Republicans had held up so many vacancies for so long.
Yeah.
And that's a real problem because he picked mostly ideological people that don't give a shit about the laws. So he's literally appointing just committed fascists with no actual legal experience. There are a lot of judges out there they're like that don't know a damn thing about what they're doing, but they know what they believe. And the way that we have given so much power to the presidency over the last century, I mean, it used to be presidents could not actually deploy federal troops on American soil. They absolutely can, and Trump literally did it, and no one stopped him from doing so. I mean, they tested a lot the first time around. The amount of damage that a genuinely committed neo-fascist can do is astonishing in the U.S. And honestly, the single best thing about Trump was that he was relatively incompetent. Compared to somebody. I mean, if you had somebody who was maybe less charismatic but more competent, they might have done even more damage. But we have given the presidency too much authority with existing legislation, and somebody choosing to use Obama set a really interesting precedent. He assassinated an American citizen, used a drone strike.
Anwar al-Awlaki,
a literal American. Now, it's bad enough that we do this to foreign militants and call them, enemy combatants and all kinds of bullshit there, because terror is a crime. It's not an act of war. And crimes get you into court. They're not supposed to put you in Guantanamo Bay for 25 years. They're supposed to get you a day in court according to our Constitution. And we have not been treating terror as a crime, which we should. It's bad enough with foreign citizens, but technically our laws are supposed to protect them as well. But setting a precedent to murder an American citizen with a drone strike, and no one cared. Do you understand what a precedent that sets? The Patriot Act was written, and I had so many conversations with people. I literally printed the USA Patriot Act out, and I took it to tons of conservative colleagues, and I highlighted sections like, you need to think about the implications here. There's an unaccountable part of the federal bureaucracy that can just declare me a terrorist. I have no appeal to that, and on that declaration of calling me a terrorist, they can send me to Guantanamo. That's all that's needed. Now,
scary. It's very scary.
Doing that, but can they? Absolutely. The laws exist. They've given themselves that power. So the problem here is with a president, you can put somebody in office willing to use the tools that have been built up over decades and actually deploy them against Americans. And that is fucking terrifying to me. No one
that's a bad thing.
2024 is going to fix this shit, but some of them will definitely make it worse.
Yeah, those are great points. Now, a lot of people have alleged there's many Trump supporters who, during the 2020 election cycle, claimed that, quote unquote, the vote was rigged, right? They thought that there was impropriety in either the electronic systems or the paper ballots, or maybe a combination of both. And also, then subsequently on January 6th, before the election was certified by Congress, there was that big gathering in Washington, D.C., the pro-MAGA crowd. President Trump spoke. And then a lot of the members of that crowd moved down in front of the Capitol. And of course, we know what happened next on January the 6th we're talking about. So how do you feel about the propriety of the election or elections in general? And do you think it was an insurrection, or what was your take on what happened January 6th?
It really shouldn't be understood as anything but an insurrection. It was an attempted coup. That it was incompetent and failed is sort of beside the point. That kind of think of it this way. So everyone knows who Benito Mussolini is, right? Mussolini came to power legally, but he did it by putting pressure. right? By having thugs beating people up and by, staging a show of force. And when the existing prime minister asked the king for authority to send the army out and stop these guys from like unaliving people in the streets, the king caved and instead asked Mussolini to form a government. So that's the kind of thing you're seeing, a kind of like strong arm tactic to put pressure. They were trying to put pressure on Republicans inside government, people like Pence, right, and the Republican congressional delegation to basically subvert the election. They were trying to put pressure on them by showing, I control the streets, I control the crowds. These are people who will ruin your lives. These are people who will drive you out of power. These are people who could unalive your family. These are my base. Do you want to piss them off? And it was an attempt to put pressure there. Now, it failed, but it's literally a coup attempt. Where improprieties in elections, I mean, we have actual independent experts who've been studying this shit for decades. I mean, the fact that they draw so much scrutiny on like mail-in ballots is hilarious because they actually have a lower rate of fraud. And when you're finding like studies showing like 0.0006% are fraudulent, it's impossible for any election to be swayed. No one has ever won a seat as dog catcher on the basis of like fraudulent elections. And people who do commit electoral fraud, they get caught constantly. And frequently they're Republicans too, which I think is hilarious. Quite a few Republicans have been prosecuted for voting twice. But it's like voting fraudulently, claiming somebody else's name, or voting twice, they're both federal felonies. So it has this very stiff penalty for no real gain to the individual. The chances of people risking that are so slim. It's just nonsensical. We haven't seen any serious electoral fraud in this country in decades. Oh, another orange one. Look at that.
I'll see your orange cat and raise you Barney. There we go.
Salve. So yeah, it's silly. Now, the problems with our elections are the money. It's all before people get in the ballot box. That's where they're corrupt as hell. Our elections are a deeply fraudulent process, but it's largely because everyone knows who's going to win beforehand because we know how much money got dumped in, we know who has the support of the establishment, and the other people just never got heard. So it's a whole different. The media is rigged, the money part rigs it here, but the actual voting machines, that's not our problem.
Now, I want to ask you this. Now, I'm not going to beat this too hard. This is one point that I've heard other people raise, so I wanted to pass it along. You probably have heard it already, too. Maybe some in the audience have. Somebody said, duh, how else would anybody else answer the question that I just asked you? So maybe that's the consensus in the audience. There are some people that I've heard, though, that believe very, very fervently that not only was the 2020 election not handled properly, put it that way, or that they thought that the federal government or the local police or whomever had people embedded in the crowd that I guess their argument is that kind of roused people up, got people more fired up than they would have been, maybe even opened up some of the doors and let some people in or whatever. So what do you think of that? And then I don't want to talk about that too much. The other question I wanted to ask you was about President Trump not being allowed to run in Colorado in the primary. And if he's kept off the ballot or kept out of the Oval Office, could that lead to civil unrest or worse?
Well, the latter one is super easy too. Like, Colorado is tiny and it can't sway an election one way or the other. So it just doesn't matter. And Colorado is likely going to go for a Democrat regardless. So it also doesn't matter. It has literally fuck all to do with the election. It also won't stand. They immediately issued a stay to their own order. So it's like pending any possible appeals or how this plays out. So it's never actually going to happen. So he's going to be on the ballot in Colorado anyway, and he's going to lose in Colorado. So it's a giant nothing burger to get people like worked up. That's the reason people do shit like this. The rest of it, it's like, let me put it this way. There are a lot of people who believe in guardian angels, not walking under ladders, black cats bring bad luck, like alien abductions, Atlantis. I don't really think it's worth much time to investigate that kind of stuff on like this whole question of like, were there agents provocateurs in the crowds? I mean, sure, that seems kind of plausible since our government has repeatedly done that shit in other countries. We did that to to topple the democratic government in Iran in '53, put
Yep.
people in crowds, but there's no reason for them to do it in this case. Like there's no plausible end game here, and it's the kind of thing that it runs contrary to pretty much everything that the Capitol Police and the federal government were established to do in the first place. It just trying to suggest that the federal government decided to the unelected part of the federal government decided to subvert the federal government that is elected, and that those elected people that come in through the money, they're the real problem. No, the people who are there year in, year out, the basic bean counters and Capitol cops and everybody else, they're just ordinary people who took a job because they genuinely believe in this broken system and they want to make it better. They're not the enemy here. They're not the ones who are going to throw down the doors and invite in a fascist dictator. They're it just for me on any kind of claim. I mean, I'll go back to that whole I don't know, like what's Sagan's great line that what is it? Gosh, how does this go exactly? Really, really, like I'm totally mangling. I don't remember the words for it, but like really extreme claims require extreme evidence. Like if you're
Yeah,
going to
that sounds right.
you need to like show something. You need to prove it, right? So when someone says there's a whole bunch of electoral fraud, and then every single investigation that even they pay for shows no electoral fraud, plus everything else done by outsiders already showed no electoral fraud. So if every single study shows zero evidence, then no one should take it seriously. The fact is, and this is where this gets really, really complicated for us in terms of big societies, big states. Most of what human beings believe is inherently irrational and false. Most of what everyone watching this believes is false. It's true for all of us because a lot of it is driven by our interaction with other people within our particular tribal affinity groups, within what sort of like makes sense within the circles we grew up in and within particular discursive frames we grew up in. And we are evolutionarily conditioned to favor things that work over things that are right. So something doesn't have to be factually accurate to feel really true to us. It's something that it's a flaw that we have to find ways to work around because it really worked well for us, on the savannas of East Africa, 200,000 years ago. But it's very maladaptive when you have 330 million people in a society all trying to work together. That you can spread around completely nonsensical ideas that just feel right and true.
That's interesting. You pointed that's a good point of view. Thank you for sharing that. Now, this is a bit of a shift of gears, and I'll try to get to some of the questions to somebody along the way here too. We're going to do questionnaires about 5 or 10 minutes, so please be patient. Thank you for that, everybody. And by the way, I don't want to assume, Liam, are you able to stay a little longer tonight? I don't want to make any assumptions as far as your availability.
I have nothing else to do. I had just like half an hour before this or so. I had just gotten back up the hill from a hospital visit for a cancer biopsy. So I've been down the hill
Okay.
today. I had nothing else planned for this day. I've got nothing else to do tonight. After this, I'm just gonna grab a book, I guess, and sit down and read. We could talk.
Sounds good. Yeah, me too.
I have
Okay, so real quick, we're going to change gears a little bit, and then I want to get into some of the stuff related to Israel Palestine, which I'm sure people are very curious to hear your take on. But this is something that I'm curious to hear from you, and that is, since you're a professor, you teach people. I assume are you online teaching or face to face or both, or
Oh, my university classes are all face to face.
okay? And how many students per class do you have typically?
Um, it can vary. When they sometimes give me the survey classes, the gen ed type ones, those are like 45 people or so. But most classes I do are upper division, and they will run anywhere from 10 to 25 people. So most of the classes are
Okay,
small because they're people who genuinely want to study something.
and is this undergrad, graduate, or both?
They're undergrad classes.
Okay. Now, in terms of I'm 56. You don't have to tell us your age, but I'm sure that you're not quite as old as me, but you're probably not as young as your students. That's fair to say. In terms of you
I'm
observing
49.
your
At this
students,
point, I'm more than
getting
twice
close,
the
huh?
age.
Getting close. So, I'm always curious to hear somebody. I don't spend as much time with younger people as much as someone like you does. Obviously, with the advent of things like technology and smartphones, they're so ubiquitous now. When I was in high school and college, we had phones that you had to pull the cord across the room, and you had to do like jump rope to get it throughout the kitchen with your family.
Yep.
And there was no such thing as mobile technology, and there wasn't even an internet. You had to go to the library. God forbid, go to the library and read a book, right? That's got to be horrible.
Catalogs.
So and you played when you're with your friends. You actually went outside and got on your bikes, and you left for like 8 hours, and you came back. If you're lucky, you got dinner. So that's kind of how we grew up that way, which is a lot different nowadays. But in terms of you recognizing differences in your students, is there anything that comes to mind as far as things not necessarily negative, but just differences that you think are noteworthy?
There are good and bad things about this. One thing that's positive is that people who actually want to learn things have far more resources than they used to. It's possible to interact with people all over the world in real time. It's possible to look things up at the drop of a hat, and if you learn how to chase down good sources, to find good sources very easily. It's not like go to the library and order something through interlibrary loan and wait 6 weeks and maybe it'll come. It's a very, very different world in that sense. So you can get some really astonishingly well-researched original work. But it also makes it easier for lazy people. So there's tons of ways to cheat. And I think this is a much bigger problem at high school and in survey classes. Again, by the time the people who are really dedicated enough and want to graduate and are taking up a division classes, they're usually not going to try and buy an essay online. They've learned that lesson and been failed already. So it's a different ballgame there. But it is easier to cheat too. But it's also quite easy to catch. It's honestly astonishingly easy to catch cheaters. I don't even have to use the turnitin.com crap. I have ethical objections to them. It's very easy to tell when something is not original work, and then I can just take a sentence out of it and Google that sentence. Oh shit, yeah, they just paraphrased this out of Wikipedia. Duh.
Yeah.
If they can find it to cheat, I can find it too. It's not complicated. I think the worst thing that I've run into just in general with students, and this is particularly problematic again for the non-upper division classes, people don't know how to write anymore because they also don't read.
That's my next question. That was my next question.
People used to actually read a lot more books, and reading teaches you how to write because it shows you how to use a word in context. So you get people trying to write an essay and they suddenly develop, they come down with a case of thesauritis and they start looking up words to try and make it sound better, but they're not using the word correctly because they've never used it before. They just try to pick a fancy word, which is it's just silly, right? Or you get people trying to use the same kind of way that they would write in a text message, for a college assignment. What the fuck is this? Don't do that.
Yeah.
The letter U is not a word. Please don't use this in your papers. Hello. But yeah, it even for good students, it actually has, I think, there has been some degradation in basic writing ability because we spend a lot more time consuming movies and video games and a lot less time consuming books. But the people who really want to do good work, I think, generally have a more of an advantage and do better work now than people could before. I think I get a lot of fantastic students like, holy shit, are you kidding me? What are you reading? How are you getting this?
That's cool.
Have conversations with them and see what rabbit holes they fell down in their interesting research. And next thing you know, oh, you're reading Deleuze? What the hell? That's awesome. So good students can make really, really good use of this technology.
And that's great to hear. And one of the things I wanted to ask you too, some people in the comments are wondering, who are these people? What are you talking about? So I'll just reiterate. My name is Chip Barnes. I go live every Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 8 to 10 p.m. on TikTok, and then every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday from 12 noon to 2 p.m. So I'd love to have you come out and check it out sometime or follow me. This is Dr. Liam O'Mara. He's somebody who I learned about on TikTok. He has a PhD. He's a history professor, and he has a whole head full of all sorts of knowledge, not just from history, just generally kind of a magnet, a guy who just sponges up information, can kind of repackage it and put it back in a way that makes sense to people. So that's why I enjoy listening to him. And he's extremely smart as well. And his ability to analyze things and give, I would call, good takes is also mixed in with that as well. So obviously he's a cat lover, as am I. And Liam and I are just talking about different things that are coming up in my mind, just different questions I'm asking him about current events versus other issues. We're about to jump into the stuff to do with the conflict right now. And I also want to ask you questions before I forget. I know that you mentioned earlier, did you say you're Jewish, Liam?
Yeah, I'm Jewish. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I'm a Buddhist, Stoic, Jewish monist, so
Okay.
it's a much more complicated approach to it. Um, but yeah, my approach to Judaism is like Spinoza's. I'm not theistic at all.
I got you. I think a lot of people are like that. They're more what do they call that? They're not as into the religion. They're more like secular Jewish people, which is a lot of people who are
Yeah,
Jewish around the
there's
world.
that, but I'm not even very culturally connected to community in that sense. So a lot of the ritual or national kind of crap that doesn't really much appeal to me either.
Okay,
It's
interesting.
more there is an interesting grounding I appreciate in it because Judaism never embraced a kind of orthodoxy in terms of what it suggests anyone should believe. It's always been so open to interpretation that is basically invited. It creates basically created a culture where no one agrees with anybody on anything, and
Hmm.
as a natural contrarian, I kind of gravitate to that. That makes sense to me. This
Okay.
because I've read a bazillion philosophers and I disagree with all of them in different ways, and I kind of like that openness to dialogue and debate. So that's something I really appreciate about it. But in any kind of spiritual sense, the closest you could get is I guess I'm kind of like a science heavy pantheist type. Like I have a certain reverence for nature. Like I love nature, I love trees, I love stars. But to me,
Yeah.
God is the universe. It's not a thing.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. So yeah, what I wanted, the reason I wanted to create that context is not so much to clarify who you are or what your religious thing is. All that's curious. I'm curious, interesting to hear it. But there's a lot of conversation in the TikTok space and also on Twitter, of course, where people will conflate any sort of criticism of what the Israeli government does, or maybe something to do with aspects of the Zionist movement, with hating Jewish people. And I don't know exactly where some people fall on that, but I can see why people look at it as like a dig, if you will, and they don't want to be criticized. But I think a lot of people try to separate the two out and not, a lot of people, even people, believe it or not, in the H group, which is what we call this crazy group who did what they did on 10/7. I'm sure you've seen, I don't want to assume, have you seen the revised charter in 2017 of what they put together in that?
One of the classes I teach regularly is literally a course on Israel Palestine. I couldn't avoid it. I actually show both charters to my students and we talk about the differences.
Okay. And did you think it was interesting that they made the changes that they made? And obviously, they didn't change the recognition of the state of Israel. The fact that they no longer included the unaliving of every last Jewish person, every man, woman, and child. Did you find that to be interesting, and that they would accept as a compromise the going back to the pre-67 borders as the possibility for a two-state solution?
Realistically, that was always an option. The single biggest argument they've made from the beginning is that when you concede everything without getting anything for it, you have no bargaining. You have you're bargaining from a position of weakness at that point. That's what the PLO did. The PLO rolled over and got nothing for it, but the outsourcing of Israel's security concerns to them. They gained nothing. Um,
Right.
and the H group has always said we are willing to compromise, but we actually have to be treated, like equals, and we have to have a dialogue. It's sort of like the parallel I make for people is because this is very difficult for states to do. Governments don't like to talk to people who try to unalive their soldiers, right? So you always have to call them T groups or whatever. So no British government ever wanted to talk to the IRA until one finally did. And when they actually met across the table without preconditions and without requiring that they disarm and without requiring that they disavow violence, what did they do? They disarmed and they disavowed violence.
Right.
Because they
Amazing how that
actually
works, right?
because the key here for anybody to understand this is that terror is driven by politics. There's a political problem. So until you solve that problem, you can destroy as many groups as you want. New ones will spring up because the problem still exists. You cannot deal with groups like this militarily. It is physically impossible. People have been trying for centuries and it has never worked. So that's ultimately the problem there. But the H group has always had that kind of flexibility, but they've taken harder positions. oftentimes for internal reasons to kind of like rile people up, sometimes because the people involved were genuinely racist themselves or ignorant as hell. There were definitely plenty of people, and I have spoken to a number of H group members and Muslim brothers in Palestine who they honestly believe some of that protocols of the Elders of Zion shit, because that's what's spread around. You know, when they run into a government that calls itself Jewish and then does this horrible shit, and then they read other horrible shit people have said about Jews, it's kind of tempting to fall into that. And if you don't have any other knowledge to correct that, it kind of makes sense. So honestly, the importation of anti-Semitism is a sad manifestation of this whole conflict. It's sadly predictable that it would happen. But
one of the things I've noticed in the dialogue online is that a lot of people don't even know that there's been a revision, and they continue to use the same language from 1987. It's like,
that's
there's no
deliberate.
longer the case. And also a lot of the reports that came up the very first day of the conflict about different things happening to babies, for example, or different burnings or grapings or whatever you want to call those terms, a lot of them don't have evidence or reported outright to not have happened. So I think a lot of people are just questioning sometimes, why do people don't have the full information about not only that, but also with the revision. It seems like people are kept, just like with our country, are kept purposely unaware of certain things and or given a different narrative so that they'll have certain consensus behind certain points of view.
Because it's useful to fold actually both H groups, so the Lebanese one as well. It's useful to fold nationalist groups that happen to be Muslim into a kind of global jihadi framework that fits the war on terror narrative, which they created in order to sustain the military spending of the Cold War era. Because they started seeing that the Soviet Union was going to hell in the 1970s, that this wasn't going to last, and they started repositioning, like, how can we sustain this stuff? And that really accelerated in the 1980s as the Soviets finally stood up and said, dude, we don't want to fight. We don't care. Like, fine, it's all over. It's done. Hell, you can even have Eastern Europe. We don't care anymore. Like, they had to figure out, how are we going to keep this money flowing to all defense contractors? Well, we can scare people about Muslims. And if you can conflate the very small, like, the kind of like radical, global Islamist type groups that are still actually a response to foreign policy, so that there are still political problems, but they're more complex. But they do have international goals. With nationalist movements that care literally nothing about people outside of their area. The H groups do not want to take New York. They just don't care. They don't want a global caliphate. They have no interest in any of this. But if you can conflate them in people's minds by saying, look, they're extremists, they're racist, they're Islamo-fascists, they're bad people, then you can keep the fear up that keeps us voting in people who keep wanting to throw more money at the Pentagon. That's the goal there. So no American media talked about the revision to the covenant. Like, none of them. I looked. It was a non-existent thing. It's just not known yet. Yeah. And everyone continues to cite the one from 88 deliberately, because doing so is strategically useful. It's like that famous picture of the Grand Mufti with Hitler. That everyone likes to say, oh, see, look, that shows a connection here, and the Palestinians are just as bad or whatever. He spent months and months and months lobbying for a meeting. Hitler had no interest in what he was talking about. We have the minutes of this stuff. It's not the way people spin it, but it's useful. That picture is really, really bad propaganda for Palestinians. It looks bad, and you can use it against them. And honestly, Hamas stepped in it the same way. They did something that people are going to be able to exploit for the next century by taking positions directly out of the protocols of the Elders of Zion in their first covenant. They gave a fantastic gift to pro-Israeli propagandists, just to say that they're permanent anti-Semites, and everything they said after this is just a lie. Like, no, people are able to learn. People can get better. It's really.
So I have a question for you. This is tough turf to say on. So if you don't want to answer, please by all means. But there are those that have alleged, going back to September the 11th, 2001. That something other than the official story may have been involved. And you mentioned a second ago, which is important to think about, cui bono, Latin for who benefits, right? What are the changes that come out of a key event? So, for example, what Liam said a moment ago was, look what happened with the defense world and the national security establishment post 9/11, right? Massive disbursement for foreign adventurers, go after Afghanistan, go after Iraq, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The drone program, the weapons manufacturers, it all works together. The energy companies, for example, in Iraq. Then you have what happened 10/7. Now, say what you want, as horrible as it may have been, it did check a lot of boxes for certain people. So, for example, Netanyahu was up to his ears in corruption charges. The population was forming basically an uprising, and who knows where that was going to go. And then this popped off, and everybody sort of gets behind the effort. You have issues with the natural gas reserves off the coastline. You have issues with the Ben Gurion, Suez Canal, a competitive system. All these things that may or may not play a role in this. Who knows? This is what people are talking about, by the way. Just so, my question to you is: do you think it's possible in any way? Not that there's evidence to support it, but do you think it's theoretically possible that some of these events, just like 9/11, could conceivably been enabled in some way that they otherwise wouldn't have happened under normal circumstances?
Yeah, see, the problem there is that a really effective conspiracy has to be plausible in some way, right? It has to check certain boxes, and lining up certain coincidences like this, it does make them work, and it makes it a lot harder to deal with them. The problem with them in taking them seriously is twofold for me. One is the astonishing lack of evidence for any of them, and the mountains of evidence for the other side of it, because we do get to see how things happen. I mean, conspiracies, that do prove right, generally have problems that are recognizable from the start, and you eventually find that paper trail or the people willing to come out. And we have nothing for issues like this yet. The other problem to me is one of agency, because it strips agency from the people who actually did it. Because we know who they are. We know what they said that they were doing. We can see their planning. I mean, groups like Al Qaeda have been studied for ages, right? People have been watching them. People knew what they were doing and what they were talking about and planning. And our own government talked for a long time about what they were planning to do. It actually put the pieces together, but in every different department had a different piece of the puzzle. But they had seen how it worked, and the discussion even about planes, like all of it was available. So to argue that it's an inside job is almost racist in the sense that it strips agency from brown people who really wanted to smack back at the U.S. It basically says, well, those people wouldn't be capable of pulling this off, but our evil government totally could. To me, that's a racist Orientalist perspective. They definitely had a reason to do it. They had a political motive. They had an ideology driving them, and they had the physical capability of doing it. Plus, they said they were doing it. So it becomes difficult to sustain those things. To me, both of those cases fall apart on things like Occam's razor. I mean, it require so many things to line up, contrary to what we kind of understand reality to be, for them to be possible. I mean, technically, yeah, anything's possible. Leprechauns could be real, but I mean, I can only say that because epistemologically, I'm a Pyrrhonist. It appears to be now to be the case that I'm talking at my cell phone with Chip Barnes on TikTok, but I could be in a jar in Futurama or something. I don't really know. Maybe this is a giant holographic illusion. Maybe I'm not a real person. Maybe I'm someone's imagination. I don't know. Anything's possible, but I have to assume that this is real. And based on the evidence we have, based on basic empirical tools, based on reason and logic, based on what the people involved said, and the fact that, and it's not just the H group. There were 5 militant groups involved in the 7th. 5 of them. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. And 2 of them were communists. They're not even Islamists. They don't even like the H group. And they recorded video, and they shared video of what they said. So not only do they have a motive, not only do they have their own organization, not only do they have their own history, and hell, the Popular Front's done some really fucked up stuff in its decades, right? Not only do they have that history, they said they did it. So to argue it's an inside job, then again, to me, kind of veers toward racism.
Let me pose this question. And I won't interrupt you. I'm sorry to interrupt. So is it possible? This is going to sound really tinfoil hattish. So I apologize. Let me put it on for a second. Okay, there we go. Okay, so is it? Yeah, there we go. Let's do it together. Is it possible that the groups that were planning what they planned to do really did plan what they wanted to do and were participating? And is it possible those who may have had forewarning of it or knowledge of it structured the defensive systems of that day in such a way that it facilitated allowing it to happen?
That's true. Yeah, no, that I think I think it's entirely plausible that there were redeployments that made this easier.
Can I take the hat off?
No, no, sure. Yeah, I mean that is not conclusively proven, but it is entirely plausible and fits some of the fragmentary evidence that we have. When you have calls being placed for support that take, an hour to respond, when you have people being redeployed and moved around that should be in that area, oh, it's for other operations, this and that. But hell, they knew that this is always a potential threat, that they usually have more assets in the region. So there are things that can be done there. So things like, it gets back to like the 9/11 one as well, right? So tons of places where different parts of the intelligence industry complex in the US did know all these things and just failed to put it together. It's also possible that somebody was given that information and put it in their pocket. Because we know tons of times that happened. That isn't proven yet, but we may find that out and it may prove to be the best thing in the long run. It doesn't mean they didn't do it, but it may be we could have prevented it. That's an entirely different thing. So I have no patience for the inside job, controlled demolition, all that kind of crap. But the fact that a Kissingerian type of figure could have just stuck something in his pocket and refused to pass along the right information so that we did have that failure, yeah, that's possible. And the same kind of thing could have happened in Israel. So there is room for a type of conspiracy here, just
Sure.
not ones that are usually spread around.
Yeah, I think in 9/11, the guy's name may have rhymed with something called Dick Cheney. I'm sorry, Rick Snaney. Yeah, that's what I meant to say.
Yeah,
Could be. So somebody was asking if you wouldn't mind elaborating on, you said there was 5 or so different groups that took part in that. I know that I know we all know one was the H group. What are the others that you think were involved that day?
Well, gosh, I'm not even sure if I'm supposed to say these words. The PIJ.
Well, you could say Islamic G, right?
Okay,
Islamic
so that's one. So that's one. And then there's the Popular Front and the Democratic Front. Both classic
right.
movements going back into the 60s and 70s. I'm blanking on the third one. It's a smaller group. I can't remember it. I think defense is somewhere in their name, or council, something like that.
I think people look at the body politic of Gaza as monolithic, like they all support the H group, of course, is absurd. So what Liam's pointing out is, like any other society, you have all sorts of groups of people that think different things and have different viewpoints. And yeah, they want to get out from under occupation and blockade. That's one thing they probably all agree upon. But in terms of how to get there, what the best means to manage the society, how the government functions. Listen, people bitch about their government, no matter if it's the H group or if it's the U.S. Federal government. Everyone, that's a universal characteristic, is disgruntledness with your governing apparatus. But so, do you think that the people in Israel who say that anybody who is alive in Gaza, because H group was voted into power in 2006, that everybody therefore is complicit and deserves whatever fate befalls them?
I mean, I have to have misunderstood that. Are you asking?
There are people on the Israeli side that they're claiming that everybody who lives in Gaza, because the H group was voted into power democratically, quote unquote, in 2006, that there's nobody who's not complicit with what was done on October 7th. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Well, it's a fantastically immoral statement. It's akin to saying, yeah, we should have completely nuked Japan into oblivion. Just like it was completely justified. We should have dropped them on more cities. Like totally justified. No, it's nonsensical. It's sociopathic, but it's also it's factually inaccurate. They weren't elected. They seized power. It's never been true. The problem with that election and where this is a really useful one, I think, for people to push back. But granted, a lot of people who are going to advance this, they're trolls anyway, and at a certain point, you just got to walk away. But with some people who are open to reality, it's worth pointing out that what the H group did, And this is where there's a problem with the covenant that you raised as well, too. So yeah, in the covenant, it doesn't explicitly recognize Israel, but that's something that belongs in final status negotiations as far as they're concerned. They already implicitly accepted its existence by participating in a PA election, because the Palestinian Authority has explicitly acknowledged Israel's existence and right to exist, and the H group joined the PA in an election for the territories for the Palestinian Authority, thereby implicitly recognizing Israel and disclaiming a violent approach. It was an opportunity to bring them in from the cold, to bring them out of being a militant group and make them a political faction, a political party. That was a missed opportunity, because what happened was the U.S. threw a fit over that. What the U.S. did was we removed all funding from the PA and told them, you won't get a dime from us again, and we've been training their cops and whatnot. You won't get a dime from us unless you attack the H group. And they did. The PA attacked the H group at our orders, and then the H group seized control in Gaza. So they weren't actually elected. They ran an election for the Palestinian Authority, and they have literally never been part of any PA government, because they weren't allowed to be part of a PA government, because we refused to allow them to do it.
Yeah, amazing how that works. I remember seeing videos of PA members being thrown off of the top of a building when they tried to unsuccessfully overtake the administrative apparatus in Gaza. So that was always a crazy memory in my mind. It was not pleasant. So there are some people that have some questions in the chat. I want to go to some questions now. I promised I'd go to Q&A, and we did a little later than we would have hoped. I do have one last before somebody from the audience.
Resistance committees. Sorry, the popular resistance committees. I couldn't remember the. I couldn't remember the word for it.
That was the fifth entity that was.
That's the fifth. Yeah, it's a much smaller group. But it's a much smaller group and distinct to Gaza, but.
So there's a lot of people in Israel society.
It's honestly amazing in the media that, given their history and given the how significant like the whole anti-communism stuff was back in the day, I honestly thought it was interesting that American media never mentions the Popular Front or the Democratic Front, and some of the worst atrocities on the 7th were actually done by them. They have a history of not holding back. So it's fascinating that they refused to talk about them at all and focus entirely on one of the 5.
It's very typical of what happened when the certain number of hostages were released too. When the hostages didn't say they were brutalized, they didn't want that getting out to the public either, because that doesn't serve the narrative of the H group being these brutalizers.
Yeah, exactly. It's not useful. In the same way that we want to ignore the fact whenever you actually see footage of people being brutalized, by the Israelis, that's always, oh, well, they were militants who surrendered, and then that's suddenly okay. But no, it's not. It's totally not okay to. That's like saying Abu Ghraib was great. No, it's never good that you do this to people, even if they are the bad guys. But the fact that it's done repeatedly, and this is where, honestly, one thing that I will hope, and I realize I'm kind of being optimistic in this, but for anybody watching this and anybody who's been kind of clued in to just how messed up this situation is by this current conflict and, been kind of radicalized by TikTok, please stay involved. Because I've been talking about this shit for decades and none of this is new. Just literally no part of this is new. Every single thing that we're seeing here, people have been talking about it and or doing it for decades. But you can't get people to pay attention to it. I'm standing there 20 years ago saying, hello, this is ethnic cleansing. Hello, this is a problem. And people are like, shh, don't talk about it. But the more of us actually talk about it and the more of us are unwilling to accept what the media is selling, the harder it is for the media to sell it. And that's important. So please stay involved. Stay connected, because this will calm back down. This will drop out of the news. It will stop being 24/7 in your feed. But you still have the ability to bring this up and talk about it regularly, and please do so.
Yeah, the one thing I was going to share, I've been following this since I had told you I learned about it in my senior year of college in 1989. So I've just out of sheer curiosity, I've been following it very closely through all the different negotiations and different, retaliations and resistance and all the stuff that we've seen over the years. And unfortunately, I think things have only gotten worse for the Palestinians, and they've never gotten better. And that's the really sad part. The one good thing I can see coming out of this, so hopefully you'll concur. I've never seen more eyeballs on this conflict ever in the history of the world. More people being aware that it exists in the first place, but then also being more sympathetic to a different view on it than what we've been spoon-fed from our mainstream media. What do you think about that?
That has been a steady change, and I've appreciated that. That's something. Okay, so going back to when you first noticed this, right? And it's one of the points you could bring up about like technology too, because the reason the first Intifada got noticed was people were taking photos. Was that some of the stories could get out. The technology had gotten cheap enough. There were cheap cameras all over the place in Palestine. People could document it, and they could get that material into European media. So the opinions began shifting in Europe decades ago. And tons of European countries have been taking positions against this. I mean, hell, before the 1973 war, the U.S. wasn't even militarily supporting the Israelis. We gave them money for food aid and like technological aid and things like that. But their nuclear reactor and most of their early armaments, their jets, their tanks, they were French. All that stuff was France. France gave them all that shit. And France did a 180 on this. They completely turned around, and the Intifada is a significant part of that. Driving a lot of their foreign policy since then. So it has been changing views in quite a few countries. Now, different regimes, different governments elected in different countries can still all be problematic, France included, but there's been a lot of popular attitude changes and a number of political shifts that have happened as a consequence over decades. It's taken a lot longer in the U.S. because of the massive evangelical population here and their Christian Zionism, because of the hardcore settler colonial racism that the U.S. shares with the Israelis. There's a number of factors that all play into this here, but the U.S., it's been a lot harder. But if you look at support for Palestinians hasn't gone up a huge amount, but support for Israel has fallen markedly by generation. So from the boomers through the Xers to the millennials to Gen Z, it is a steady decline in support for Israel, and it is well below half now. And that is a remarkable shift from like 80%, like Israel can do no wrong, to like more than half the population saying maybe Israel isn't really our friend. And that's entirely generational, and a lot of it has to do with more information being available.
It's amazing. You made the comment earlier that the U.S. wasn't heavily involved in subsidizing Israel. They had political support, of course, but not as much economic or military up until things changed. So one thing that people don't know one thing that happened in 1982, Israel had a war with Lebanon, which obviously, a lot of U.S. troops got killed. A lot of Marines that were stationed in southern Lebanon got blown up, like 244 soldiers. And Reagan called Menachem Begin and basically said, cut it out, or we're not giving you any money anymore. They had just started providing funding for the Israelis, and that's the only time a U.S. president has threatened Israel that I can remember in the last, 40 years.
Senior did. George Bush Sr. is literally the only U.S. president to threaten sanctions.
He did? Okay, I didn't know that.
And it actually got them to the Madrid process. The reason that negotiations with the Palestinians started is actually because of that. They ended up, the Israelis, we gave them a way out of the Madrid process, and Clinton is a good part of the reason for that, because Clinton was much more pro-Israel. And what they did was they started the whole Oslo process. And the way the Oslo process worked was it created direct negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians, which meant the power imbalance was there. At Madrid, the U.S. was at the table too. And Bush Sr. was literally willing to cut all, military ties. We're not going to give you any more guns. That's it. Done. Unless you start talking to people here and deal with this problem. And the reason for that is not because he was any less racist, right? Because let's face it, that's not true. The reason was it actually imperils our relations with the Arab world and the Muslim world as a whole. It complicates our geopolitical position. When people talk about Israel as an American ally, they're ignoring two things. One, we have no actual formal alliance with them. They have never actually been a U.S. ally, right? Two, they actually make things much harder for us geopolitically. They really complicate our position with a lot of other countries and have for a very long time. And, some governments have been willing to kind of like push on things like this. Now, Reagan also not a good guy here overall. Bush not a good guy here overall. Neither of them really wanted a Palestinian state either. They both actually would have preferred the Jordanian option. There's all kinds of issues you can bring up there too. So this is not to say they did something genuinely good here, but oftentimes the internal politics mattered more to that kind of old school conservative, like the way that it kind of like shaped our foreign policy and the way that it is structured inside our government. When in the 82 war, I don't know how many people in your audience know, there was a particular set of events over 2 nights and a day at a couple of refugee camps that unalived a lot of people. I don't know if I can say these words. But there was an event in 82 after the PLO had already been moved out by the U.S., right, that cost a lot of lives.
It was a mass acre.
Exactly. It was a mass acre by phalangists and tigers, like by the Maronite forces that went in there, and the Israelis, lit up the sky with flares and helped them out and whatnot. But, it was a bunch of these Catholic militias going in there doing horrible shit to people. In that event, right, all the information came out. There were immediate investigations. This is the first time that actual active duty Israeli officers and soldiers criticized their own government publicly. Like it was kind of like the Vietnam sort of situation in the U.S. where you had people coming back saying, "Hi, this is fucked up. Why are we doing this?" And it led to the fall of that government. In the investigations, all this detail came out, right? And after those reports were available, the U.S. Congress voted to send more money and more military aid to Israel. Reagan tried to veto it, and he did it not because of the moral issue, but because what message does that send to the Arab world when our Congress rewards Israel for doing that, when Israel admits what it did wrong? Like it had literally, the reports had come out, the evidence was there, and they said, yeah, done fucked up.
It's like giving Derek Chauvin a briefcase of money after the George Floyd incident.
Exactly. It's like, oh yeah, we got all these pictures of you doing this. Here's a reward. Here's a nice vacation to Tahiti. Here's a big bag of money, and we're going to
not have gone over well. Yeah,
to chief of police. No one would have liked that, So it looks terrible. So Reagan's position was not principled. It wasn't moral. It was based in realpolitik. It was based in what fucking message does this send, and how does this really complicate our relations with places like Egypt? So a number of administrations have taken those positions. One thing we have seen in the last few decades is that more and more American presidents are more ideologically committed to the Israeli right, and less interested in the realpolitik. They're more willing to basically piss off the whole world in support of that. And that's driven more by our domestic politics. That's driven by Christian Zionism and its control over a lot of politics. This country, for 40 some years, New Deal Democrats controlled Congress. When the right seized power in 94 and have held power, a significant amount of power ever since in the US, they did so, that realignment brought a lot of that that kind of evangelical fundamentalist Christian Zionist.
That was Newt Gingrich contract with America. That was that whole.
Yeah, exactly. That was a long-term process. That took decades of building up. When Goldwater was running in the 60s, everyone thought he was a complete crank. but a lot of the hardcore conservative, like the reactionary sort of values, and a return of fundamentalism, which actually went into decline in the U.S. after the 1920s. And by the time you get to the 1940s and 50s, for most people, it's like, what the hell? These people are nuts, right? But the time you get into the 1980s, people who want to talk literally about Noah's Ark are suddenly like major political figures, and it's no longer, it's not problematic for anybody anymore. That return of evangelical Christian political power in the U.S., that realigned our internal politics. And that means we have to support Israel come hell or high water, because they need to be there for the apocalypse to happen. And it doesn't matter how many people we piss off in the process. That's something that a lot of people in Congress and in the White House will kowtow to as an idea, even if they don't personally share those views, because so much of their voting base does. And they know who's buttering their bread.
Yeah, for those who don't know, Vice, which is one of these alternative news kind of programs, they did a special where they sent that like geeky looking kid out to do. He went out and visited one of these tourists. It's like a tourist agency that gives tours to evangelical Christians. and they actually take them out to the area where they think this big battle is going to be held that's going to cause Armageddon to come, and then
Yeah.
it'll usher in the second coming of Jesus
Yep.
after everybody blows each other up or something like that. So I want to finish with one more thing. We have a few minutes left before 10 o'clock, and then I have to sign off. But there weren't too many questions that came in off the audience. So if I missed your question, I apologize, audience members. What is the possibility if the conflict does increase? If U.S. readiness requires it, is there a possibility there'll be a draft of any type in the United States in the next 5 or 10 years?
It's not politically viable. No, it's really not. I mean, I think that they would actually revisit some of our foreign policy before they did something like that. I don't think the domestic politics work for it. It isn't
Okay,
a
interesting. Now,
idea.
and one last thing, I'm sure people are curious to hear. You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but do you have any predictions regarding the presidential race in 2024, the outcome? Wow. Is there a third party candidate that can make it in like Bobby Kennedy, or is it going to be Trump or Biden? What do you think?
If that nut gets in there, we're screwed. Holy crap, he's terrible. Wow. I mean,
do you think it's possible? Is it possible he could get elected? Is it possible?
In the current field, second worst to Trump as far as I'm concerned. But no, there's no chance. I mean, I know where my protest vote's going to go, but that's about all they are. There is a slim chance that Genocide Joe holds on to his spot there, but but he only won because a significant number of people turned out in a handful of cities. If you didn't have massive youth and black turnout in a handful of cities, you could not have taken the states that he did. So it's a problem there. Trump is the more likely winner at this point. And he kind of needs to just to end his his own like legal problems.
Legal trouble. Yeah, no doubt.
But it's honestly terrifying. Like what he actually can do and what he is already saying he can do. And they've been organizing for years now that he will be much better prepared. He thought he would lose in 2016. They didn't do a lot of advanced preparation for what they would do when they got in power. They just kind of ran. Right. He has a lot of hardcore true believers, so his little, whatever you want to call them, I guess, red shirts, his marching brigade,
MAGA.
His people, they have been preparing for what they can do to make sure they never lose again. And that's honestly terrifying. So yeah, but right now it looks more likely. But to me, there's nothing distinct about that. For anybody you didn't pay any attention to this stuff beforehand, like we have been heading in this direction for decades. None of this is new. Somebody like Trump was inevitable. And after Trump, someone worse will come along. It's just been the general trend in this country toward neo-fascism. And that shit doesn't end well. Radical nationalism has consequences, both for the world and for the country that tolerates it. So I'm not looking forward to how the next few decades are going to play out. But
no doubt about it. Well, Liam,
so
if other people want to follow your work, what is the best way for them to kind of stay in touch with you other than here on TikTok? Of course, if you can follow Liam by clicking on his name or photograph, it'll pop up his profile so you can follow him. But how else can people follow your work if they want to follow you?
Well, the same kind of username that I've got on TikTok, the Liam O'Mara IV, is my social handle everywhere. So if you're on the slowly sinking Twitter, if you're on Threads, if you're on Mastodon, if you're on Facebook, if you're on Instagram, I can be found exactly the same way on all of them. And
so it's Leah. It's Leah. There's no apostrophe. It's Liam Omara and IV, right?
Yeah,
LIAMARAIV. Okay, LIMOMARAIV, like 4 in Roman numerals.
Correct. Yep. So that is the same everywhere, and I think you can probably still find me by searching that on YouTube. But the actual YouTube channel is Office Hours with the Mad Professor. I've been uploading a lot of the TikTok stuff to it, including all my lives. I upload those to them later there. I used to do content directly for it, but I haven't had much time for it for a while. But there's that. And if anyone wants to support me on Patreon and help give me, maybe if I teach a few less classes, I'll be able to write more books. So there's that. I don't want to share with the audience. Just a lot of independent voices like myself and Liam and others.
no corporation's ever going to subsidize our work. They just want nothing to do with a straight shooter like us. So if you're speaking truth to the establishment power, you're not welcome at the cocktail party. You're certainly not getting any checks written your way. So to that extent, Liam, how would they find your Patreon if they wanted to follow you? Do you have like a link tree or anything like that, like a
Oh,
single link, or how did it
no,
get to you?
I should probably make one of those, but it's still the same way. You can if you search me on Patreon, it's still Liam O'Meara the Fourth. The same string works for me so far everywhere. If I ever lose one of
Right.
these accounts, I'm gonna be real pissed at those companies. I've managed to hold
All
all
right.
of them. I'm shadow banned in a lot of them, but none of they haven't actually been shut down anywhere.
No, I hear you. Well, I can't say it. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Hopefully, you do it again because we only covered a certain amount of ground. I think the audience absolutely loved hearing from
Yeah, like I said, anytime you want to plan something like this, just let me know. If it fits my schedule, then it's fine. I have found that doing this is actually very relaxing. Especially after after my commutes on the way back up, it's a nice way to unwind at night. I was surprised about that. But it works really well. So I'm perfectly happy whenever we can line things up.
Beautiful. Yeah, we'll set up. I also let people know ahead of time. I only gave people about an hour's notice tonight about you coming on, but hopefully enough people did it. Next time I'll do a little more of a promo. But everybody, please, I hope you share your love in the comments for Liam because I really enjoy listening to him, and I think everybody got a lot out of tonight's session. So thanks again, Liam. And for those of you, by the way, just to let you know, if you're
Uh,
new here, go ahead.
I was gonna say one thing. I before I forget, I've seen a few requests in the chat there for me to stay on afterwards since my time zone's different anyway.
Yeah,
I can for a while. That's fine. If anyone wants to stick around, I'll leave my live going. I'm gonna go get more coffee or cacao or whatever, but I'll
sure
stick on
thing.
for a while longer.
And I'm not sure exactly what happens that since we're together, if I close mine out, I guess it just drops me off. But I don't know if
I
you
think.
can separate your live and keep going without having to like turn off one or the other. I've never done it before that way. So there's still
Find
parts
out.
of TikTok I don't fully understand. But
Right? Yeah, we'll find
anyway,
out because we went live separately. So theoretically, I think if we separate them, it should keep mine going. But we'll find out. If I drop off, I will start. I will restart it. So just
let
anybody
me see.
listening.
Let me see if I can. I don't know if there's a way to do it through the menu because I was going to spend a minute just doing some of my own personal. I didn't want to hold you up by talking about my personal stuff. But anyway, so I tell you what, it was nice having you. If you're able to get off while I'm talking, great. If you can't, then you'll have to listen to me say my personal stuff. But I wanted to share with the audience that I go live here on TikTok every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 p.m. Eastern time until about 10 p.m. Eastern time. Of course, tonight being the same. And then every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, it's from 12 noon till 2 p.m. Both Eastern time. And then that schedule that I just mentioned. If you go to my video feed, that's pinned as a message in the upper left-hand corner. So if you ever forget, just go there and check that out. And then I have a lot of videos that cover a lot of the same terrain that Liam and I talked about tonight. Not as much detail, but you get the idea. You can only do so much in 2 or 3 minutes. But then on top of that, I have a link tree, like Liam was mentioning. He uses his name, Liamomara, the fourth IV. Most of my stuff is my name, Chip Barnes. And unfortunately, Chip Barnes was taken here, so I had to go with Chip Barnes 67, which was the year I was born. Yeah, way back then. I know. It's funny when you have to scroll through and pick your birth year. It's like scroll, 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 scroll. It's like so, it's like enough of this, please. You're making me feel old. So there's that. Anyway, I have a link tree, and what the link tree is nothing more than a shortcut to all the other places that I have social media. Just like Liam has his names, I have all my stuff listed there. So Twitter, Instagram, the whole 9 yards. And if you want to help out, like Liam said, I'm also in the same spot as him, where I'm working, for myself, by myself, with no real help. So if you want to help, it's greatly appreciated. I do have a Patreon, like Liam mentioned. Mine's like $5 a month. I'm going to be adding additional tiers for some extra stuff, like private only live sessions, Q&A, Zoom meetings, that kind of thing. But if you want to just do a donation, if you do it here on TikTok, which I always appreciate, they take 70%. In case Liam didn't know that, they keep 70% of whatever the donation is. So, again, if you're willing to share, you can share where that doesn't happen as much. That's better for someone like me or Liam than that happening. But any amount's better than nothing, right? So we'll take what we can get. So I appreciate everybody being here. I want to thank the moderators who helped out, which is Maz and I think M. Thank you for doing a great job in the chat. And I really appreciate everybody being here. I know everybody has a different choice. So many choices of where people go to get their content now. You have unlimited things you can do. And I really want to say thank you for being here with Liam and I tonight. So everybody, it was a pleasure. And we'll see you on the next time. Liam, great having you here. Okay. See you. Bye to your cat too. Take care, everybody.